Hello, I'm Steve Foerster. Welcome to our project In Pursuit of the Perfect Portfolio. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here with Dr. Harry Markowitz, 1990 Nobel Prize in Economics winner and the father of modern portfolio theory. Harry, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start off by taking you back to the early 1950s and tell me about your first investment decision.
When I wrote my article, my 1952 article, I had never invested. I was a student I don't want to say I'm a poor student. I mean, I was a student without funds. And the first time I had the opportunity to invest was when I had joined the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica. They offered TIA versus CRIF, stocks versus bonds. And at that time, I look forward to telling this story. People have it wrong, have it right, but they don't have the right conclusion. At that time, I thought, if the market goes up, the stock market goes up, and I'm completely out of it, then I'll look silly. And if it goes down and I'm 100% in it, I'll look silly. So I went 50-50. So I was, at that time, minimizing maximum regret. Now, the story is sometimes told, and I've seen it even in the Wall Street Journal, that Harry Markowitz, when he makes his portfolio decisions, he doesn't use mean variance analysis, he doesn't use MPT, he just uses minimax regret. Well, that's what I did in 1952, but that's not what I would do today. It's not what I would recommend, more precisely, it's not what I would recommend a 25-year-old do now. Now I'd probably put them 100% in stocks. A lot has happened since I published that article in 1952. There's an infrastructure. We have this data that goes back to 1926 at least that shows you how, on the average over the long run, if you'd put $1 in small caps, it would be worth like 13,000 or something like that because it's compounding at 12%. If you put it in large cap, it'd be worth 3,000 or 5,000 because it's compounding at 10%. But if you put it in government bonds, it'd be worth $150 as compared to 13,000. Now we have optimizers. We didn't have an optimizer in 1952 and so on. So the conclusion is false that now Harry Markowitz, 2017, would recommend to a 25-year that they go 50-50.
So I want to come back to that later on in our discussion in terms of your views on the perfect portfolio. So that's a great foreshadowing of what your thoughts are. Let's go back to when you were working on your dissertation at the University of Chicago, and you have this unique ability to see things that other people don't see. Can you tell us about one of the aha moments when you were in the University of Chicago library reading John Burr Williams' investment book, and what were your insights that came to?
That was my first aha moment, and I've been seeking aha moments ever since. I was at the stage where I had to write a dissertation. We'll back up a little bit with the story. I went to my thesis advisor, Yasha Marshak, to ask for suggestions. He was busy, so I waited in his anteroom, and another guy was out there, and the other guy was a broker waiting for Marshak. So we talked about why we were here, and he suggested that I do a dissertation, in the stock about the stock, applying mathematical econometric techniques to the stock market. So I went in before he did. I told Marshak, the guy out there, suggested that I do a dissertation on the stock market and apply to the stock market. And Marshak said, well, Alfred Coles, who endowed the Coles Commission, would like that. He was actually interested in application of econometric techniques to the stock market. He was the first to do experiments with whether forecasters could forecast and found out they couldn't, and so on. So Marshak thought it was a good idea, but he didn't have he didn't know the literature, so he sent me to Marshall Ketchum, who was then dean. Professor Ketchum was the dean of the business school, I now understand. And he gave me a reading list, which included Graham and Dodd, which is still on my shelves, of course, and Wiesenberger's investment companies and their portfolios. And we could see how things were diversified and classified by industry. And then John Burr Williams was the financial theorist of the day. And Williams said that the value of a stock should be the present value of its future dividends. And now, of course, dividends are uncertain, so I figured he meant the present value of the expected value of future dividends. And then later in the book, he does say that when things are uncertain, you should use the mean value, the expected value. Then my reasoning process went, well, if you're only interested in the expected value or the average mean value of a stock, you must be only interested in the mean value of a portfolio. And if you're only interested in the mean value of the portfolio, the way you maximize that is put all your eggs in one basket, which I knew that wasn't right. So I thought, well, you're trying to avoid risk as well as seek return. I drew a graph with risk on, return on one axis and risk on the other. I thought of the returns on securities being like random variables. That means that the return on the portfolio is a weighted average of the returns on the individual securities where you choose the weights. I knew offhand at the time what the expected value of a weighted sum was, but I didn't know what the variance or standard deviation of a weighted sum was. I got a book off the library shelf, Uspensky's Introduction to Mathematical Probability. My memory isn't that good, but I remember that whole scene very well. And looked up the formula for the variance of a weighted sum, and there it was, covariances, correlations. So I had the aha moment that the variability, the riskiness of the portfolio depended not only on the volatility of the individual securities, but to the extent to which they went up and down together. And so there's still a lot to do. That became essentially my 1952 article, plus a little geometry of pictures of how efficient sets look. And there's still more to do, like figuring out how to compute these things and estimate. But that was the aha moment.
So these ideas that seem so simple now, but yet you saw something that no one else had seen. I don't know
why Williams says that if you diversify sufficiently, you will get the mean. But that is only true if risks are independent, uncorrelated. If risks are correlated, you don't get the mean. You get there's a rule that says the variance of your portfolio, and this is from Chapter 5 of my 1959 book, the variance of the portfolio doesn't approach zero, it approaches the average covariance. So if all the correlations are zero, then the average covariance is zero, and variance will approach zero. But in general, it won't. And how somebody can live through the 1929 to 1932 crash and assume uncorrelated is difficult to see in retrospect.
I think his book came out in 1938, so he should have.
He had gone through. He had seen the 2932 was fresh in his memory.
Yeah.
See, the notion of diversification goes way back. The Bible has some reference to it. The Merchant of Venice. Antonio, why are you sad? Is your business going bad? My goods are not to one bottom trusted, but not my fortune to this year. So so he knew about diversification. What was lacking was a good theory that would catch up with intuition.
And you brought that theory, and,
Right.
and here we are now in March of 2017.
Right.
And now this is the almost to the
25th, yeah,
to the day
25th anniversary.
the 65th
Oh,
65th
right,
anniversary.
25th is gone.
Yes,
65th
anniversary
How
of,
time
of
flies.
that paper. So I want to talk about that because this is the Journal of Finance paper called Portfolio Selection.
Right.
And what's so striking about it is how different it was compared to other papers that appeared in that same issue that looked at inflation and public policy issues and income statements. What is it that made your paper stand out and made it so different at the time, and yet it wouldn't be that different from other Journal of Finance articles today?
Well, my emphasis was on portfolio selection, considering the portfolio as a whole. They were all talking about evaluating securities or industries, and the notion that you should have some kind of a theory about what makes a well-diversified portfolio and what is the trade-off between risk and return. It's surprising that the human race went so long to leave me to discover that, to fill that need.
And really providing a process that helped to create a whole investment management, portfolio management industry.
Let me tell you a little story.
Sure.
Peter Bernstein, of course, who's his book on there's a
Capital
book,
Ideas.
Capital Ideas, and something Against the Gods: A Strange History of Risk. That's the history of risk. He was at a meeting that I was at too. The Rob Arnott has an annual meeting, and I'm one of his advisors. And Peter Bernstein, Peter was there then. He's no longer with us. And after in his comment about on somebody else's paper, just as a remark from the audience, not as part of his paper, he said, his comment on somebody else's paper, you younger people don't know what institutional investing was like before the 1950s. We would sit around and have discussions like you see on television about I think this industry or I think this company, and somehow we would cobble together a portfolio. And he said, now you have a process. And it was at that moment when he said, now you have a process, that I realized what I started. Of course, there's a lot that goes into it besides, like data and programs and so on and so forth.
That must have been an amazing moment for you to realize that.
Always, yeah.
Now, 1952 was a great year for you.
Uh-huh.
You have the Journal of Finance paper, but a lot of people don't realize that there was another paper that you refer to as Markowitz 1952b,
Right.
That appeared in the Journal of Political Economy, the utility of wealth, and it's through that paper that you've now been often referred to as not only the father of modern portfolio theory, but the grandfather of behavioral finance, behavioral economics. Can you tell us about that paper and the key insights?
Now, first, confirming that, certifying that I'm the grandfather of behavioral finance, Danny Kahneman has a book out called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And of course, if you're Harry Markowitz and you get a copy of Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, first thing you look to in the index to see if I'm referred to. There's two references to me. One was sort of inconsequential. The other was told us the history of how prospect theory came about. And Kahneman says that he and Tversky were struggling with some experimental results which they just couldn't understand. And finally Tversky came and said, now I got the answer. It's in a then 25-year-old paper by Harry Markowitz. It said that if you want to explain actual behavior, do not attach utility to wealth, attach it to change in wealth. And that, then that plus what and then there was a certain shape of the curve, depending on. My curve had a concave portion on the left in losses, so that was explaining why there's insurance, why people insure, and then there was a convex portion which explained why, which is part of the explanation why people bought lottery, and then there was again a concave because otherwise you have the St. Petersburg paradox. Now how did that all come about? I was taking Milton Friedman's class in microeconomics. I don't remember whether it was an assignment, an optional assignment or a mandatory assignment, but he assigned a paper by Friedman and Savage. I can't remember the name of the paper, but it was trying to explain why there was both gambling and insurance. And it had a curve, which is very much like the Markowitz curve, the later Markowitz curve, in which there was a concave portion, a convex portion, a concave portion. So I looked at this and I thought, well, if you took it looked like a two-humped camel walking uphill. So if you take a plank and put it against these two humps, you get a double tangent. And the behavior of people depend on where they are with respect to these two tangencies. Like, for example, if you have two middle-class people who are halfway between the lower tangency and the upper tangency, there's no fair bet that they would prefer than one where they flip a coin and one becomes poor and one becomes rich. And you don't see that, in fact. And then the people who are below the lower tangent, the poor people, they don't buy lottery tickets. And then I don't know who's lining up in front of me when I'm trying to buy a Wall Street Journal on 3rd Avenue in New York, and so on. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. And the only point that made any sense was at the inflection point where there'd be, you were cautious on the downside and maybe a little bit willing to gamble a little on the upside. And then I said, I didn't call that, that's usually current wealth, but I said, I call that customary wealth, because if you have a recent windfall gain, you move into the convex part, and you're a little bit more devil may care. You're playing with house money, so to speak. And if you have a recent windfall loss, you become more cautious. So the only point that made any sense was this inflection point, and as compared to your say, Tversky says, economist Tversky, they speak of his current wealth, but I talked about his customary wealth, because you're usually there, but if you had a recent windfall gain or loss. So that was another aha moment.
You've had many of them.
I love them. I adore them. That's one of my...
So you followed up your 1952 portfolio selection paper 7 years later with a book by the same name, and it packed a lot of things into it. There was a chapter on matrix algebra that I think many famous people, including Bill Sharp, learned.
Yes, he said I don't know who else did, but he says he learned it.
Absolutely. So what had changed, and what was in there in terms of some of the nuggets that eventually became the capital asset pricing model that Bill Sharp, under your tutelage, was able to follow up on?
Well, let's dispel the notion that Bill Sharp got the idea for the capital asset pricing model from me. Let me tell you, as long as we're down that path, let me tell the relationship between me and Bill. We think roughly 1960, as far as Bill and I can reconstruct it. I was working at the Rand Corporation. He was working at the Rand Corporation. I was working on the SimScript programming language or something else besides portfolio theory. And he appeared at my door and said, "My name is Bill Sharp. I'm a student. I work here like you do, and I'm a student trying to get a PhD at UCLA, right?" Fred Weston, who was the publisher, who was the editor of the Journal of Finance at that time, had told Bill, why don't you ask Harry for a suggestion? You like his 1952 article. Why don't you ask him for a suggestion? And in chapter 5 of Markowitz 1959, I talk about what I call derived covariances, the fact that there are just too many covariances to expect, or correlations to expect anybody to any team to individually look at them and estimate them. So you need something like a factor model. And I pointed to him out the idea that there's too many covariances, and why don't you try building a factor model and see how well it works. So that became Sharp 1963, a simplified model of portfolio theory, which showed how if you're estimating factors for each security rather than covariances, if you have 100 securities, you got 100 times 100 divided by 2, roughly covariances. That's 50,000, whatever it is. So whereas you'd have 100 betas to estimate. So not only is your estimation process easier, but he published ways of quickly tracing out efficient frontiers. And in those days, computing wasn't like it is today. The biggest computers in those days weren't as powerful as your cell phone. Anyway, so he published Sharp's 1963 article was on factor models. His 1964 model was on capital asset pricing model. Now I've published on CAPM, but it's like I have an article called "Market Efficiency: a Theoretical Distinction and So What," and came out of the FAJ, I don't know, decade ago or so, plus or minus. And it said the theoretical distinction was between the proposition the market is efficient in the sense that it has correct probabilistic information, everybody has the same beliefs and they're correct, and everybody has a mean variance efficient portfolio. You have to distinguish between that efficiency in that sense, everybody's processing information correctly, and the statement, the market portfolio is a mean variance efficient portfolio. What I show in that paper, that FAJ paper on the theoretical distinction and so what, is not only do you have to distinguish those concepts, but in order to deduce that the market portfolio is a mean variance efficient portfolio, and there's this linear relationship between expected returns and beta, you have to assume either, like Sharp and Lintner, that you can borrow all you want at the risk-free rate, or you have to assume, like Roy did, that you can short and use the proceeds. So you can give your broker $1,000, short $1 million worth of stock 1, and go long $1 million and $1,000 worth of stock 2, and that's a feasible solution.
I don't think we'll get away with that.
I don't think. Well, try it at your broker. If you do, tell me what your broker's name is. So there's a Reg T, and those have that has constraints. So, and it's also true that there is not a linear relationship between expected returns and beta thus defined. So these folks who find that there's not a linear relationship and then have all these fantastic explanations of why there isn't a linear relationship, my explanation is very simple. It's there is. I don't know about you, but I can't borrow all I want at the risk-free rate. That said, I should add that I still think CAPM was very important because it is a null hypothesis against which you can test, empirical results. A lot of people do, and it's just their when they find there isn't a linear relationship, and they have all these fantastic explanations. I think CAPM was very important historically, and still is as the null hypothesis against which all things get measured.
Let me come back to something we talked about earlier. Let's sort of circle back. Mm-hmm. The perfect portfolio.
Okay.
What do you see as the perfect portfolio for individuals, for institutional investors. Is there a perfect portfolio?
Sure.
And what might be coming out of your work that would suggest one type of portfolio versus
Sure.
another?
Okay.
To sort of tie it into.
Now, first place, since I don't believe that because people can't borrow all they want at the risk-free rate, I don't believe that the market portfolio plus or minus leverage is even efficient. So it's certainly not perfect. The difference between a major difference between Markowitz 1952 and Markowitz 1959 is Markowitz 52 proposed mean variance efficiency, and it analyzed it subject to one particular constraint set. The sum of the x's equal 1 and the x's are not negative. By 1959, I had come to realize that you might want lots of other constraints on the choice of your portfolio. You might want upper bounds on individual securities. You might want upper bounds on how much you have in certain in industry or sets of securities. You might have other linear constraints, like you want to have income at a certain level as compared to, and so on. So what I provided in Markowitz 1959 was a computer program that found mean variance efficient portfolios subject to any linear equality or inequality constraints. They're linear constraints like the sum of the x's equal 1, or inequality like this plus this has got to be less than or equal to that. And these are used in practice. Like I have a client who does portfolios of closed-end funds, buying them when they're at deeper discount and selling them when they're less deep discount. But he has a world index, an all-country world index benchmark, and so he constrains the portfolio not to deviate too much in any one country and not to deviate too much from the benchmark in any one region, and he doesn't want the turnover constraint to be too great, and so he has a turnover constraint and so on. So talking about the individual, well, individuals differ. They differ in their tax situation, so that it should be an after-tax mean variance analysis, and that gets a little tricky because there are things with different time horizons. You put it into the 401k plan, you can't get it back out without penalty until you're something, 59 and a half or whatever. Okay, so the correct maybe not the perfect portfolio, but the correct portfolio for the individual depend on the risk preferences. They're willing to trade off risk for return. You don't want them dropping out of the program prematurely. So if it looks like the right thing for the long run is to have them 50% in small cap, and small cap is very volatile, or maybe it's 50% in the emerging market, which is very volatile, and if it has a bad bounce right off the box, you'll decide that's a stupid asset class, it's a stupid manager, and you go out of the program. So there are constraints on the choice of portfolio, which varies from individual to individual. Some individual, they have shorter or longer horizons. They are willing to tolerate. They're willing to invest in certain asset classes or not. They have different tax situations and so on. So there is no perfect portfolio. There is a right. We will assume that there is a right portfolio for them, and part of the process is to involve right from the day one. Part of the process is always to involve the user, the investor. What is their trade-off between risk and return? In the old days, you just showed them a frontier and you said pick. Now you do Monte Carlo simulation to show them what is a few points from the probability distribution of how much they can spend when they retire and so on and so forth. So there is no perfect portfolio. There's just the right portfolio for a specific individual. It's a lot of work to find it.
So again, it's the process that you provided. It's certainly going to be diversification.
Right.
It's going to be an important element to that, but not necessarily the market portfolio. Is what I hear you
typically not. In fact, you've run frontiers. You know they start out with a fairly undiversified portfolio, and they pick up securities and they lose securities, and people are different. Different people are at different points on the frontier, and nobody's holding the market portfolio because the market portfolio probably isn't even an efficient portfolio, and it's certainly not an efficient portfolio for everybody.
And we can't borrow and lend at the risk-free rate.
Yeah,
so
it would be, if you could borrow and lend, if you could borrow all you want at the risk-free rate, then the only mean variance efficient portfolios would be the market plus or minus leveraging, but it's not true.
So where do you think the investment management industry is going to go in the next 65 years? Right now we've got robo-advisors, which in some sense is going back to the beginnings and looking at things in a systematic way. Where do you think the industry is going?
Well, I might mention that I have a number of clients. I work on retainers, and so somebody's paying me even now that I'm goofing off talking. And a couple of my clients are robo-advisors with different. One is Acorns, where they take small change. They round up the bill and your credit card bill and invest it I'm all for robo-advisors. They have to then make some guess as to where you want to be on the frontier. Or maybe just the fact that you chose them, this particular advisor, robo-advisor, shows what kind of portfolio you must be interested in. I think we are now doing a very good job, increasingly good job, of exploiting my 1952 idea. And now let me tell you the idea that's in volume 2 of the 4-volume book I'm currently writing called...
Anxiously waiting.
Yeah. I got to plug the book. It's called Risk-Return Analysis, and the subtitle is The Theory and Practice of Rational Investing. And actually, it's not about rational investing. It's a rational decision-making, financial planning, and so on and so forth. And volume 2 talks about decision support systems. So a 401k advisory service or a robot service is a decision support. You, with the better one, the more flexible ones, you get to interact with the system and pick what risk class you want to be in and what savings rate you'll need to have and so on. So it helps you. It helps you make the decision, then it takes your decision and implements it. So it's a decision support, not a decision maker, it's a decision support system. Now, the investment decision, I think, the way I view it, is part of a game which the family is playing. And these are financial, this is the financial planning game. But it has to do with many things like births and deaths and weddings and people getting sick and having insurance, all life events. It is the events and decisions which have major impact on the supply and demand of financial resources. And just analyzing the portfolio selection decision in isolation is like trying to decide how bishops should move in a chess game without considering the chess game as a whole. So I think the way I see the thing going in the next 60 years, and it's the way I'm trying to push it in volume 2, is for the man-machine, the human-computer division of labor to cover more fully the various aspects of financial planning.
Well, we wait anxiously for volumes 3 and 4, and on behalf of all investors, I want to thank you for what you've contributed to help us make better decisions, more rational decisions, and I really appreciate you taking the time today.
It's been my pleasure, both to work at this field for the last 65 years. We've decided, and your interview was very pleasant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.